Welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 79. We're going to talk about Howling 3, The Marsupials from 1987. I watched this on Freevee. I had not seen this before. As always, we begin by discussing the prominent crew and cast. This film was written and directed by Philip Mora, special effects makeup and supervisor by Bob McCarran. I went into Philip Mora's bio when I talked about The Howling 2, the single coolest film, in my humble opinion, Bob McCarran worked on is Mad Max: The Road Warrior in 1981. He's also apparently a trained paramedic, which is cool. The cast includes Barry Otto as Professor Harry Beckmeyer, Max Fairchild as Thylo, Imogen Anenzia as Jerboa, Dagmar Blahova as Olga Gorky, billed as Dasha Blahova, Lee Bielos as Donnie Martin, Ralph Cotterill as Professor Sharp, Frank Thring as Jack Citrone, and Burham as Kendi. Actor and artist Barry Otto has a long list of credits. I was most impressed to find he is the father of actress Miranda Otto, and he was in the Dolph Lundgren version of The Punisher from 1989. Besides Mel Gibson, he is the only other actor to appear in both Mad Max from 1979 and Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior in 1981. Dagmar Blahova was born in Czechoslovakia and left in the late 70s during the communist era. She gained fame on Australian television and film after emigrating. She returned to the Czech Republic in 1998. Frank Thring's birth name is Francis William Thring IV. His father, noted Australian film director from the earliest days of cinema, is usually credited with inventing the clapper, the two sticks attached to a slate. The Thring was in the Australian Air Force during World War II and acted in the golden age of Hollywood. Known for his biblical villains Pontius Pilate and Ben-Hur in 1959, and King Herod in King of Kings in 1961. My favorite film of his is Mad Max: Beyond Thunderdome from 1985. Aboriginal actor Burham exploded onto the scene, appearing in 3 movies in 1987. He was done acting by 1992. Now let me be clear, this is a bad movie, but it's also a fun movie. It tries so hard. So I do recommend this for werewolf diehards or fans of bad movies. If that's not you, you can safely skip this one. As a tidbit, the credits specifically claim that this film is based on the third Howling novel. However, the stories have nothing to do with each other. I do feel like I ought to read the series at some point. The Howling is pretty influential. Maybe my next book special. Let me know if you want a review and discussion of the novel series in the comments, and I'll take it under consideration. Now let's move on to the spoilers. Documentary footage shows early 20th century Australian Aborigines ceremonially sacrificing a bipedal wolf-like creature. The U.S. National Intelligence Agency receives reports of a werewolf killing 3 villagers in Siberia. They call in Harry Beckmeyer, an Australian anthropologist who's an expert on, and I quote, weird shit. Meanwhile, Jerboa, a young Australian werewolf, flees her abusive stepfather, Thylo, and her whole backward, inbred-looking clan. Homeless in Sydney, she is discovered by a young American, Donnie Martin. He offers her a role in a horror film, Shapeshifters Part 8. Jack Citrone, the film's director, praises her natural talent and hires her immediately. 3 of Jerboa's sisters are tracking her down, dressed as nuns. Get it? Jerboa and Donnie watch a film depicting a werewolf transformation. Jerboa insists that it doesn't happen like that. She tells Donnie that she is a werewolf. He doesn't initially believe her, but after sex, Donnie notices Jerboa's lower abdomen is covered in downy white fur, and she has a large horizontal scar across her stomach. Beckmeyer and his colleague, Professor Sharp, fruitlessly brainstorm ideas about how they can obtain evidence of werewolves. At the film's wrap party, strobe lights trigger Jerboa's transformation. She flees the party and a car hits her. Meanwhile, her sisters crash the wrap party in werewolf form and attack everyone. At the hospital, doctors find Jerboa has a marsupial pouch and striped fur on her back like a thylacine. Someone lets Beckmeyer know. The army shows up too. Jerboa has an intense nightmare about giving birth to a monster. The sisters assault the hospital and take Jerboa back to the pack's hidden werewolf town, Flo, which is wolf spelled backwards. Doctors discover Jerboa is pregnant. Sharp and Beckmeyer spend the evening watching a visiting ballet troupe. They witness the prima ballerina, Russian defector Olga Gorky, transform into a werewolf. She has had visions of Thylo. She's captured and taken to the laboratory, but quickly escapes with the help of her manager, who, it turns out, is also a werewolf. He is gunned down, but she makes her way to Flo, where the pack wants her to be Thylo's mate. Sharp and Beckmeyer locate Flo, where they meet an aboriginal Thylacine werewolf named Kendi. Donnie follows everyone. Jerboa gives birth to a tiny baby werewolf that looks like a naked mole rat, which crawls into her marsupial pouch. It's simultaneously creepy and touching. Jerboa finds Donnie nearby and shows him their baby boy. He reacts much better to the sight than I would have. They flee to the hills just in time. The next morning, a government strike team captures most of the werewolf pack. Beckmeyer convinces Olga to allow scientists to study her and Thylo. Beckmeyer tortures Thylo with strobe lights and forces him to transform. The scientists finally put the Thylacine connection together. The army intends to finish eradicating them. Beckmeyer disagrees. Olga knows of werewolf tribes in Russia, Australia, Africa, and China, maybe California. Beckmeyer frees Thylo and Olga. The trio escape into the outback and find Kendi, Donnie, Jerboa, and their baby, who is growing up really fast. Kendi summons the spirit of a phantom wolf named Iramunan, which massacres the pursuing hunters. Kendi dies in the process and is cremated. The smoke alerts more soldiers who are still in pursuit. Kendi's reanimated skeleton attacks the soldiers before being pulverized by a machine gun. That night, Thylo summons Iramunan again and is transformed into a huge wolf who attacks the remaining soldiers. He's killed by a bazooka blast that destroys the camp. The army thinks that they have eradicated all the werewolves. Olga and Beckmeyer fall in love. The pair, plus Jerboa and Donnie, homestead at an idyllic riverside camp. Eventually, Jerboa and Donnie return to civilization, assuming new identities. The Beckmeyers remain behind to raise their children. 15 years later, Sharp locates Harry and informs him that all lycanthropes have been given amnesty due to the crimes committed against them. Human lycanthrope peace is declared. The Beckmeyers move back to the city. 8 years after that, while teaching a class in LA, Beckmeyer is approached by a young man who introduces himself as Zach, Jerboa and Donnie's son. Zach informs Beckmeyer that his parents live in Los Angeles under new identities. Jerboa is now the famous actress Loretta Carson, and Donnie is the famous director Sully Spellingberg. That night, Olga and Beckmeyer watch Jerboa win an acting award on a television show hosted by Dame Edna Everage. As Jerboa accepts the award, the flashing cameras and stage lights trigger her change into a werewolf. Olga also transforms, to her husband's dismay. Jerboa goes on the rampage as her sisters howl in glee. Sharp is seen in his living room, chuckling deviously. The final shot is of a thylacine. The movie ends with someone shouting, "Cut." Oh boy, this film has got a lot of transformations. And let's tackle them roughly in the order they appear on the screen. First, there's the transformation shown in the fictional movie within the film. This sequence is intentionally bad and meant to look silly. It features excessive, over-the-top bladder effects that take too long and are not motivated by human or wolf physiology. A particularly humorous moment is when the nurse is just screaming and screaming without attempting to run or do anything else. It's an effective joke. Next, we have the thylacine transformation scenes. These effects are much simpler. The werewolves have an odd appearance with elongated jaws resembling the extinct Tasmanian tiger. Fortunately, the film includes enough historical footage of thylacines to see the physiological similarities. The thylacine is not a wolf, but a leaner animal with longer jaws that almost resemble needle-nose pliers to me. It makes sense that a shape changer derived from a different animal would look different. The thylacine werewolf's appearance feels unsettling, which mirrors the effect of comparing them to traditional wolves. It's an example of the uncanny valley concept, where they're close enough to wolves that our brains expect them to look like wolves, but they're not quite right, which causes discomfort. The Australian werewolves evoke a similar feeling, close to, but not quite what we're used to. Luckily, we have Russian werewolves in the traditional style for comparison. The ballet transformation scene is the film's standout to me. The blending of high art with the lycanthropic metamorphosis directly speaks to one of the film's main points, which we'll explore more clearly in a bit. The Russian werewolves in this film have a much more traditional look, providing additional evidence that the unconventional appearance of the thylacine werewolves was a deliberate artistic decision. The weakness of this film is that the movie treads a very strange path regarding werewolf lore, forcing us to potentially throw out the typical mythological playbook. The big issue is reconciling the first two Howling movies with this third installment. It would be easier if we didn't have to. There is only one point where the Howling 3 even raises the possibility it exists in the same cinematic universe as the Howling and Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf. When Olga tells Beckmeyer she is aware of rumors about a werewolf tribe living in California, potentially referring to the colony from the original film. Like the first two films, none of the werewolf transformations were governed by the cycles of the moon. However, that's where the similarities end regarding how lycanthropy functions in this universe. This film portrays the lycanthropic condition as expressly genetic rather than infectious. We witness a werewolf birth on screen. No one seems worried that Donnie or Beckmeyer might accidentally get bitten and contract lycanthropy, right? That's not a worry. The marsupial werewolves are also killed by conventional weapons, displaying no particular weakness to silver or titanium. But the more glaring issue this film raises is the inherent biological implausibility of blending placental mammal traits with those of marsupials. In evolutionary history, these two families of mammals split from their last common ancestor over 160 million years ago. They have vastly different chromosome counts and entirely incompatible gestational strategies. Placental mammals, like humans, gestate their young through a placental and umbilical cord, while marsupials bear extremely underdeveloped young in a pouch to continue developing. I know we're suspending disbelief by accepting the concept of humans shapeshifting into wolves. That goes with the territory. But this film, like a few others in the genre, go out of its way to try and explain lycanthropy through some level of biological specificity and genetic principles. In doing so, they open themselves up to scrutiny over how incongruous it is to mash up such wildly different mammalian taxonomies into one hybrid creature. And then to go so far as to suggest that the Russian werewolf Olga can mate with the Australian werewolf Thylo and strengthen their bloodlines. It just makes no sense. Before delving into the primary theme of the movie, I need to acknowledge that all these video essays present my opinions. This one, in particular, is highly subjective. While this film is a campy and over-the-top blend of horror and Australian culture, it is also a satirical commentary on the elevation of pop art and lowbrow culture to the status of high art. Through a plot involving a tawdry werewolf film being passed off as a prestigious artistic vision, the movie skewers the idea of commercialism in pop culture, becoming celebrated by elite artistic institutions. The fictional werewolf film, Shapeshifters Part 8, is portrayed as an utterly brainless, gory, and sleazy B-movie exploitation flick. However, the egotistical filmmaker, Jacques Citrone, recontextualizes it as a transgressive piece of avant-garde art. He describes a scene where a character is fictionally sexually assaulted by a gang as high art. The film references Andy Warhol's simplistic pop art depictions, like Campbell's soup cans and Brillo boxes, becoming accepted as high art by the 80s when the movie was made. Initially, Warhol's choice of subject matter, brand logos, advertising imagery, celebrity portraits, seemed antithetical to the intellectualism associated with high art. His techniques, like screen printing and mechanical reproduction, were seen as impersonal and lacking the skilled handiwork expected of accomplished artists. Warhol's proclamation that he wanted to be, quote, a machine only reinforced criticism that his art was shallow and commodified. However, Warhol's work revealed a critique of mass consumerism, celebrity worship, and the cult of personality defining American culture. His instantly recognizable paintings of soup cans or Marilyn Monroe interrogated society's obsession with brands, media, and image over authenticity and substance. His art forced uncomfortable self-reflection on popular culture's shallowness, contradicting high art's pretensions to higher truth and meaning. Warhol elevated the mundane into the conceptual, employing paradoxical aesthetics to make profoundly postmodern commentaries. His silkscreen technique may have seemed gimmicky, but it definitely captured the mechanical reproduction inherent to mass media and consumerism. The artist's famed inscrutability and emotional detachment mirrored the dehumanizing nature of society's brand obsessions. Now, what Warhol understood is that pop culture is not high art on its own terms. Pop culture imagery as a subject matter, as a mirror to enduring human vanities, desires, and society's value systems, is what elevates it to art. While initially dismissed as a subversion of, quote, true art, Warhol's revolutionary pop art steadily achieved institutional acceptance as insightful and influential. Major museums validated his historical importance, and Warhol expanded art's creative and conceptual boundaries in ways still being explored by today's artists. By appropriating pop imagery, he revealed eternal human truths, anxieties, and the essence of the modern experience. Ultimately, Warhol's visionary pop art became recognized as conceptually rich, high art destined for critical reverence. The Howling 3 exposes a misunderstanding of this idea, that if works like Warhol's can be considered capital A art, then even the most vapid Z-grade slasher schlock is equally worthy of that pretentious elevation. This occurs by blending the elevation of the subject with the deconstruction of authority that emerged from postmodernism, an influential intellectual and cultural movement in the latter half of the 20th century. While postmodernism brought fresh perspectives challenging traditional modes of thought, it presents significant issues that ultimately, in my opinion, undermine its utility as a philosophical and artistic framework. Postmodernists distrust broad explanations and grand theories attempting to make sense of complex human experiences and knowledge. Instead, they deconstruct all assumptions, emphasize relativism, fragmentation, and the idea that there are multiple subjective truths. They emphasize understanding the influence of ideology in shaping power structures, artistic canon, and authoritatively approved knowledge. While questioning presumed certainties can promote critical thinking, taken to an extreme, this relativism paradoxically prevents recognizing distinctions of quality, ethics, and value. Claims to greater truth become just another oppressive meta-narrative. This fosters a sort of meaningless nihilism where all moral, aesthetic, and epistemological values become arbitrary social constructs without any grounding. In the realm of the arts, postmodernism's embrace of appropriation, pastiche, irony, and self-referentiality often comes across as gimmicky and bereft of authenticity. Questioning originality and authorial intent leads to works that feel shallow, cynical, and devoid of deeper meaning and purpose beyond surface-level cleverness. Taken too far, postmodern art risks devolving into an insular Ouroboros of references cannibalizing themselves into irrelevance. While questioning assumptions is important, postmodernism takes that skepticism to a degree that obstructs knowledge, ethics, and progress. Its contradictions and unwieldiness have relegated it to more of a fad in academia than a substantial philosophical foundation. As a methodology of critique, it has merit, but as an enduring worldview, postmodernism's flaws ultimately outweigh the constructive insights it has offered. In 2014, the philosophers Theodor Schnick and Louis Vaughan wrote, "The statement that no unrestricted universal generalizations are true is itself an unrestricted universal generalization. So, if relativism in any of its forms is true, it's false." Having said all that, no coherent intellectual school has risen to consensus as a response to postmodernism. While certainly an excessive and over-the-top horror film, The Howling 3 manages to make insightful points, satirizing the fine art world's contradictory reverence of pop art. This film uses its own schlocky, lowbrow nature as a launching point to condemn how shallow and even dangerous it can be to unquestioningly treat pop culture effluvia as high art, simply because it comes packaged with a transgressive exterior. It's a sly bit of satirical meta-commentary wrapped in an admittedly ridiculous but entertaining horror shell. Can lowbrow films centered on populist commercial subjects make important artistic statements? Yes. Does it do so automatically just by existing? No. So now let's talk about the thylacine. The thylacine, scientific name Thylacinus cynocephalus, was a large carnivorous marsupial that roamed Australia and the island of Tasmania. They were apex predators, hunting mammals like kangaroos and wallabies, as well as birds and small animals. They had stripes along their backs, giving them their tiger nickname. Despite sharing some general body shape similarities, they were marsupials, not closely related to tigers or wolves. Before European settlement, thylacines coexisted across mainland Australia and Tasmania with other megafauna like giant, short-faced kangaroos and wombats. Rock artwork in places like Kakadu National Park, apologies if I mispronounced that, suggests that they held significance to indigenous Australians. When Europeans arrived in Australia in the late 18th century, thylacine populations began declining due to introduced diseases, hunting by settlers, and habitat loss. Dingoes and wild dogs brought by Europeans outcompeted thylacines in many regions. By the early 1900s, they were completely wiped out on mainland Australia. As thylacines vanished from the mainland, their last stronghold was the island of Tasmania off Australia's southern coast. However, they were hunted aggressively by settlers protecting livestock. Tasmania declared thylacines a protected species in 1936, but it was too late. The last known wild thylacine in Tasmania was caught in 1933. It was sent to the Hobart Zoo, where it lived for 3 years before dying in 1936. This individual, nicknamed Benjamin, is considered the last living thylacine after the species went completely extinct, both in the wild and in captivity. For decades after this, there were alleged but unconfirmed sightings of thylacines, sparking hopes that the species still existed in some remote area of Tasmania. Searches were carried out, but no conclusive evidence of a living thylacine population has ever been found. The thylacine was declared officially extinct by international authorities in 1986. The thylacine's extinction due to human causes has made it a symbol of human-driven extinction events. Efforts are underway using genetic technology to potentially de-extinct the thylacine by combining its DNA with a living marsupial relative. However, technical and ethical hurdles remain. The rapid demise of this unique Australian predator over just a century is seen as a striking example of how quickly human activity can completely wipe out a species across an entire continent. Next, let's talk about the fisheye lens. In photography and cinematography, lenses come in various shapes, sizes, and specialities, each offering a unique perspective and creative possibilities. Among these lenses, the fisheye lens stands out for its distinctive ability to capture an extensive, distorted, and oftentimes surreal view of the world. A fisheye lens is an ultra-wide-angle lens producing a distinctive curved, barrel-shaped distortion, resulting in an image appearing to have been captured through the convex fisheye-shaped lens. This distortion causes straight lines to become curved. Objects near the edges of the frame appear significantly more stretched and enlarged relative to those in the center. The origins of the fisheye lens can be traced back to the early 20th century. Initially developed for use in meteorology and astronomy, its exceptionally wide field of view, typically 180 degrees or even slightly more sometimes, allows scientists to capture a broader swath of the sky or landscape in a single image. In the latter half of the century, the fisheye lens gained popularity among photographers and filmmakers as a creative tool for artistic expression. One key advantage of the fisheye lens is its ability to capture an immersive, panoramic view of a scene, making it particularly useful for architectural photography, landscapes, and interior shots. The distortion created by the lens can also lend a sense of dynamism and movement to otherwise static subjects, making it a popular choice for action and sports photography. Its distinctive curved distortion can be utilized to create a surreal, abstract, and even psychedelic effect, allowing artists to push the boundaries of traditional representation and explore new visual dimensions. Despite its unique capabilities, the fisheye lens is not without challenges. The extreme distortion it creates can make it harder to compose shots effectively, and the exaggerated perspective sometimes results in unwanted distortions or unnatural proportions. Furthermore, the ultra-wide field of view can also introduce challenges in controlling focus and depth of field, and the lens often captures a vast expanse of the scene at varying distances. Nonetheless, for photographers and cinematographers willing to embrace its quirks and limitations, the fisheye lens offers an extraordinary tool for capturing the world in a unique and captivating way. Whether used for its immersive panoramic capabilities or its surreal distortions, the fisheye lens continues to inspire creativity and push the boundaries of visual storytelling. Finally, just a weird bit of happenstance, but I ended up watching this film on Mother's Day. How appropriate. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on discussing Teen Wolf 2 from 1987. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back next episode.